This is the brand new Losi Mini LMT Megalodon, and this thing looks absolutely awesome. In today's video, we're gonna tear this thing completely apart, see what makes it tick, test it out, and then later I'm gonna try to throw this brushless system from the BLX grommet and see what this thing can really do. First of all, guys, this Megalodon body is probably the nicest RC car body I've ever seen. It is absolutely beautiful. Let's take a closer look at it. To remove it, we simply undo the latch in the front, undo the latch in the rear, and then undo the latches on the sides. As you can see, this is a highly detailed, hard plastic body, but Losi has made all of the contact points nice, soft material. That means this thing should be able to handle some serious bashing without breaking. Of course, we'll be finding out if it really can in a little bit. Taking a closer look at these latches, they're really nice, spring-loaded latches that are very easy to use. These side latches aren't spring-loaded, but they do have alignment pins, which makes them fairly easy as well. The plastic for this body is very thick. We're looking at approximately 1.5 millimeters, which is way thicker than normal bodies are, and they did it without making it too terribly heavy, though of course this is going to be a bit heavier than a standard Lexan body would be. It does have a full internal cage, and we've got a little driver figure hiding there in the middle. Again, as you can see, these fins are nice soft plastic, and they are separate pieces. And as you can see here in the manual, the fin set can be purchased separately, which means you don't have to buy an entire body if you damage one. Speaking of damage, I am really hesitant to damage this body. I really just want to put this on a shelf and look at it. It's so beautiful, but this thing's made to bash, so we're gonna do it. Speaking of bashing, under the body, this thing is all LMT. If you've ever had a full-sized LMT, this is gonna look very, very familiar, but let's take a closer look at what you get. Under these retaining straps, we have an included 2S 810 milliamp hour battery. That comes with the same Spectrum smart charger you get with the Groms, although in this case you get a cable with it instead of an adapter. That's actually a really nice touch. You do get a 25 amp 2-in-1 Spectrum receiver ESC combo. This is very similar to the ESC receiver combos you get in the Groms, but it's not identical. It is, however, identical to the one you get in the Losi NASCAR. We're going to run into a little bit of a challenge installing this BLX Grom ESC because it has these ears here. These are for mounting the servo on the Grom, but we should be able to just go ahead and cut those off. One thing I'm curious about is whether or not the dynamic stability control in this receiver is going to work with the stock SLT2 transmitter that comes with the Mini LMT. As you can see here, it does have the updated power button, which is momentary instead of latching like the old ones were, but it's black instead of orange, which means it might not be able to control that dynamic stability control. We'll just have to find out in a little bit. I also have no idea if the dynamic stability control in this is even going to be compatible with this platform. It might be specifically tuned for the Groms. Again, we'll just have to find out. Rounding out the included electronics, you also get 4 AA batteries, and you get an IC2 to EC2 adapter. I'd like to have seen an IC2 to EC3 adapter, but it is nice that they include this. They do include a cross wrench, which fits all the way down inside these wheels. It's a little bit challenging to get them undone, though, because the cross of the wrench actually goes into the wheel, making it kind of hard to grab onto. These tires are very squishy. They have really soft rubber and really soft foam in them. That should give them good traction on multiple surfaces, but might make them balloon once we start putting some serious RPM on them. Those are attached to really deep dish wheels, and those wheels are on 12mm hexes, and those hexes are plastic, but they are positively retained. One thing I'm curious about is there's 6 screws down in the bottom of here, but it doesn't look like they do anything. Let me take them out. Okay, so yeah, these little screws appear to be purely decorative. The hex is built into the wheel. That is a nice decorative touch, though. Little touches like that and the BKT license branding on these tires are nice because this is a pretty expensive vehicle. How expensive this is and whether or not it's worth the money is something we'll talk about a little later in the video. The nuts holding the wheels on are nylock, but they're not serrated. For the kind of forces these wheels are going to be experiencing, that's probably fine. If you like seeing deep dive teardowns on every new vehicle, make sure you get subscribed and make sure you're turning on that bell for post notifications because we do giveaways all the time on this channel. And I announce the winners of those giveaways in community posts. If you don't have post notifications turned on, you might miss it. With those tires off, this thing looks really, really awesome. And this thing is all Losi LMT. The suspension feels nice and soft front and rear, though I did notice one thing that's a little bit concerning, and that's how much side to side play there is in these 4 links. The way that these links keep the axles where they're supposed to be is through triangulation. As you can see, this lower link and this upper link creates a triangle here. You have another triangle here, and then another triangle here in the middle. But that location ability depends on tight tolerances, and as you can see, there's a little bit of wiggle room here, and I think that's because these rod ends have some play in them. I don't know how much that's going to affect handling. We'll just have to find out, though. It will be some. As you see here, pretty much all of these screws are going to be M1.5 head, so if you're going to be working on one of these, make sure you get a good 1.5mm bit. The smaller the socket on your screws, the more important it is that you have high quality bits so you don't strip them out, and also make sure these sockets are really, really clean, get any dirt out of them, because if there's there's any dirt in there, it's probably gonna strip. I'm usually not a huge fan of these 1.5mm head screws, but on something like this where it's designed to look scale, I don't think it's nearly as much of a problem. This is a pretty small truck, and the smaller heads do look more scale than if they were quite a bit larger. As you can see, this screw here is larger, and it really does kind of look out of place. For an RTR, these shocks look pretty nice. They're all plastic, but they do have threaded bodies. We've got a bump stop here at the bottom that limits harsh up travel. However, it doesn't feel like we've got a bump stop inside. And now we'll just take this shock cap off. Okay, that's really tight. Oh wait, this doesn't actually look like it comes off. These unload from the bottom, just like the 3S Armas do. And of course, if you read your manual, you'll know that. That's why reading these manuals can be really important, because if I didn't know that, I could have ripped the top of the shock off trying to get that cap off. So now we'll just take this apart from the bottom, and it comes apart very easily. We've got a little O-ring here sealing it. And then we've got a fairly standard looking piston with a clip holding it on. Given that the top of this doesn't come off, this is going to be an emulsion style shock. And basically that just means whatever little bit of air is left in there when you're done is going to form an emulsion with the fluid. And that's what's going to give you the extra room for the shock shaft to move in and out, rather than having a bladder in the top that'll move up and down to give you that extra room. We'll just go ahead and put this back together again. And there we go. Being a full hobby grade truck, obviously not only can you get replacement parts for it, but you can get a lot of upgrades for it. Losi does offer quite a few. These shocks are one of them, and they're really nice. They're full aluminum, and they do have bleeders up at the top, though they come pre-filled with fluid, so you don't have to do anything with them, but put them on when you get them. And beyond those shocks, Losi also offers a bunch of different upgrades, and of course the aftermarket has a ton available as well. All right, next let's take a closer look at these solid axles. Seeing these 12mm hexes gives me some ideas, which we might have to get into a little bit later. That is, of course, assuming this thing survives that long. One thing I've noticed on this is so far, basically every screw is a different length. That's really important to be aware of so you can keep track of them and make sure you don't put things back in different places than they came out of. Some of these parts are also very, very small. That's kind of the nature of the beast when working on something like this, but it can make working on them more challenging and does make this a little bit less beginner friendly. Again, it's kind of hard to avoid just because there's a lot going on here. Now we'll just pop this axle out of here, and then we can get a better look at these aluminum links. The links themselves look really nice, very high quality. I don't think for this size of vehicle you're gonna have any problem with them, but again, as you can see, there's a little bit of extra play here in the ball ends, and that's what's causing that side-to-side movement in the axle. I'd like to see that tightened up just a touch. Speaking of the axle, the drive shaft has a plastic center, but really nice looking steel input and output universals. So far, everything I've touched feels really high quality, which is good because this is expensive, and it's expected because it's from Losi. As you can see, these rear lockouts actually have CV ends in them, and those are attached to what appear to be dog bones. We'll have to see what it looks like when we get to the middle of it. That's actually an interesting choice, given that we've got universals here in the front, so it's not a part sharing thing. Normally, unless they're doing part sharing, I'd expect to see solid axle shafts all the way out. I suspect this may be to allow for a rear steer upgrade, but let me know down in the comments if you know why they're doing it this way. By the way, so far we do have all ball bearings, however these are shielded. I would have loved to have seen sealed bearings in this application, but on these small vehicles we often do see shielded bearings. Okay guys, be warned, if you want to get into your front or rear differential on the Losi Mini LMT, there are no fewer than 21 screws holding these halves together. And now I can see why there are so many screws holding it together. There's no separate differential housing in here. This differential uses the actual axle housing itself for its assembly and location. Without that, it just comes right apart. And this differential actually looks interestingly familiar. As you can see here, this differential is very, very similar to the 1/16 Traxxas differentials. We do have all metal gears here, and I think these are sintered steel. Yes, they do stick to a magnet, so these are sintered steel. And you're going to be stuck with grease on these because there's really no way to put any fluid in them because this is not a sealed differential. However, we do have no fewer than 3 bearings supporting this differential, so it should hold the gears in good orientation with each other. Whether or not that's going to hold up to some serious power with big tires, we'll just have to find out. To get to the transmission gears, we need to take some of this scale detail off, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of it. We've got a rail here, a fake exhaust here, some protective Lexan with a bunch of sponsorship on it, and a bunch of other really cool pieces. Then underneath here, we can see we have a twin vertical plate design for the chassis. That means we've got 2 plates running the full length of the chassis that everything's mounted to. This type of chassis is kind of similar to a full-size Monster Jam monster truck, but as you can see here, the full-size trucks use a full tube frame chassis, and that's a different architecture to this twin vertical plate, but I think these TVPs offer a decent compromise between realism and cost. Underneath this cover, we have what would be known as a transfer case in a full-size truck. Essentially, it's taking the power from up here where the motor is and then transferring it down where it can then be sent out through the front and rear drive shafts. Under this bottom cover is where you would find the center differential on the full-size LMT. On the mini LMT, we just have a bevel gear set, and I couldn't find an option for a center differential, though that would be really cool. If you know of a center differential option for this, let me know down in the comments. Along with the lack of center differential, it looks like this truck also doesn't have a slipper clutch, but this could be a cush drive. Let me get this clip off and we'll take a look inside it. Whenever taking this style of clip off, you need to be really, really careful because they can go flying across the room and then they're gone. I'm gonna go ahead and do this off camera so I don't lose it. Okay, now pulling this apart, we can see that yes, we do have a cush drive in here. How this works is it adds rubber isolation between this part of the gear and this part of the gear. That creates a little bit of damping in the gear train, and that can really help protect your components from shock loads. It's not as good as a center differential, but it's certainly better than nothing. As you can see here, all these gears are also sintered steel, just like in the differentials. In the front is a very similar solid axle to the rear. We've got a fairly strong looking plastic steering system, and running that is going to be the SX108 analog servo. This is a different part number to the SX110 that you get in the Groms. I'm curious to see if that's just a part number difference or if one of these is better than the other. Let's find out. The first observation is that the mini LMT servo saver appears to be a bit more sophisticated than the one on the Groms. This just uses a ramp style servo saver, and this uses a radial spring style. I suspect this will hold up better in the long term. Overall, these servos do look nearly identical, but maybe there's something different inside. Pulling off the bottom covers reveals that these two do look almost identical, though not quite. The wires are different colors, but the motors and electronics appear fairly equivalent, if not identical. And then removing the top, we can see we have mostly brass gears here with one aluminum gear here at the bottom, and on the 110, it looks absolutely identical, so I think these servos are equivalent to each other, but you know, maybe this one is just two better. The Spectrum site does show the specs for this one, but unfortunately not for this one, so I guess we'll probably never know. That being said, I'm really excited to see how this thing performs, so let's get it all back together. All right, guys, fresh 2S pack, let's see how fast this little shark is. That's not terrible. Don't want to scratch the body up just yet. Feels pretty stable. It's not fast. Will it do a wheelie? Not really. All right, let's see what we got. Okay, 16 miles an hour, that is not very fast. We've got some freshly torn up dirt here and the ramp from crawler tracks. Let's see how this thing feels. Okay, so far so good. It's handling the bumps pretty well. It feels pretty scaled. It only does 16 miles an hour, but to be honest with you, for this kind of little backyard scale bashing, the power it has does feel pretty sufficient. Let's see if it'll do a jump. Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. Let's do that again. Get her lined up, see what we can do. Yeah, that's pretty fun. And the suspension actually feels really, really good. It can be pretty difficult to get these little cars to handle rough terrain well, and it seems like Losi's actually done a pretty darn good job of it. There is some pretty serious ruts and sticks out here, and this thing's not getting stuck at all. That was a pretty cool front flip too. So far I'm pretty impressed. Let's see how it handles some grass. And yeah, it seems to be doing well in the grass too. For how small the tires are on this thing, I'm really surprised. I thought this thing was gonna be getting stuck everywhere, and it just isn't. It's handling it really well. This thing's pretty fun. Even being top heavy with the shark body, it seems to not want to tip over very easily either. Let's see how it does on a slightly larger ramp. That handles that really well too. It's handling the big bumps, it's handling the small bumps, so I'm pretty impressed. That's really rough over here. We just had some trees taken down and the Bobcat tore the ground up, and this thing's also tearing the ground up. This thing is a lot of fun. It does roll over reasonably easily, and that's to be expected given the solid axle design and the fairly heavy body. Let's try the backflip feature on this crawler tracks. Oh yeah, she can do that for sure. Let's see if we can just get a single backflip. She wants to do double and triple backflips. Let's try one more time. That's a lot of fun. Won't quite do a backflip off that jump, but I think we can fix that. I've got my first few packs through this thing now, and I can tell you it is a lot of fun, but is it worth the nearly $280 price tag? That is a tough question to answer, and here's why. On one hand, this is just a small mini RC basher, and it is a decent little RC basher, though it is brushed, it's fairly slow. Being solid axle, it doesn't handle the best in the world. It's pretty top heavy with this body, and I would say its features are pretty much just average. The reality is, as a basher, this thing is basically the same price as the Trax Traxxas Minimax, and I said the Traxxas Minimax is overpriced. And this thing is bigger, more powerful, faster, probably more capable, but there's a big difference between these two trucks. The Minimax just has to be a basher. That's all it has to do. It didn't matter what the form factor was. It didn't matter how they made it. It just had to be a good basher at a good price. And I think as just a straight basher, it's too expensive for what you get. The Mini LMT, on the other hand, is two different things. It's both a mini basher and a scale replica of a full-size truck. I'm going to tell you my final thoughts on the value of this at the end of the video, but for now, I want to see how it'll handle some brushless power. This should be a fairly straightforward conversion, though we are going to have to make some modifications and buy a couple of special parts. But I am really curious to see what just swapping the Grom power system in will do, because if they ever come out with a BLX version of this truck, this is probably the power system that's going to be in it. We might be able to sneak the power system out of here without removing that battery tray, but this will give us better access to everything, and it's easier for you guys to see it in the video. Interestingly, they have what's known as a ferrite bead on here. Basically, what they do is allow low-frequency signals to pass while blocking high-frequency signals. They're completely passive. They're just an iron ceramic composite, and that composite's really good at letting DC and low-frequency signals pass while blocking AC higher-frequency signals. Brushed DC motors have a nasty habit of creating a lot of electronic noise, and this ferrite was probably to help suppress that noise. They were probably having a problem with reception in the radio or something like that. Losi decided to go belt and suspenders on this ESC. They've got both double-sided tape and screws holding it down. Nothing wrong with that, unless of course you have to take it off. This ESC is going to physically fit on here just fine, but we are going to have to cut these tabs off. But first, let's get this motor swapped out. This is the 4500 kV motor out of the Typhon Grom, and whereas it's about the same size as the brushed Losi motor and has the same bolt pattern, the output shaft is quite a bit larger. This 16-tooth pinion is on a 2.3mm shaft, and this is on a 1/8" shaft. Because these gears are mod 0.5, there aren't a ton of options for gears that will fit these shafts, but fortunately Hot Racing does make some, and I've got a 16-tooth pinion right here. I genuinely don't know how this 4500 kV motor is going to perform, as there is no direct conversion from brushed turns to brushless kV. But this brushless ESC does have an IC2 connector on it, so we're definitely going to be trying the stock 2S battery. Of course, you know 3S is coming too. Now here's something interesting. This is a 16-tooth pinion, and this is a 16-tooth pinion, but this doesn't fit using the same holes as this one. This is something you can run into with different manufacturing tolerances on these gears. Hopefully I've got two holes that'll line up. Let me find out. Okay, yeah, it looks like these two holes are going to work fine. Maybe the old motor was already in those holes. I don't remember. By the way, if you get a pinion gear that has grub screw holes 180 degrees apart from each other like this, only use one grub screw. If you use both, basically what you're doing is just bearing on the 2 points of the grub screws, which isn't how this is supposed to work. It's supposed to be a grub screw against the flat that then lets the entire gear bear against the entire shaft on the other side. If they're 90 degrees apart, that's no problem, but if they're 180, just use one. And with the cover on, that was actually still a little bit tight. If that happens to you, there's a trick you can do. Even though these have specific holes, there's always gonna be a little bit of play in the holes, so you can wedge something under the motor and push it away while you're tightening the screws, and that'll give you just a little bit more play. And doing that, now it rolls nice and smooth. In order to test out the DSC, we need to make sure this is mounted in the right orientation. This is the same orientation it was mounted in the Typhon Grom, but again, we need to get rid of these tabs. If you're squeamish, look away, because we're just cutting them off. There we go, now we can double side tape it to the mount. Hopefully these wires are gonna reach. They do, and this thing's looking pretty factory. Last thing we need to do for this is plug in the servo, and unfortunately this servo wire just barely doesn't reach. Obviously you could just upgrade the servo, but I'm just gonna use this little extension and that'll be fine. Now let's see if this thing's gonna bind with the stock SLT2 transmitter. Got that in bind mode, let's turn this on. And yes, it does bind, does it work? Steering works? Throttle works, so yes, we can bind it with the stock transmitter. Unfortunately, this does not appear to have the programming in it to make the dynamic stability control work. Just so we can control that, we'll go ahead and bind it with an SLT3. I'm gonna do that, finish putting this thing back together, recharge the stock 2S battery, and let's see if we can beat 16 miles an hour. Brushless power, stock battery, let's see what she can do. That is definitely more pep. Brakes are a bit touchy. Here we go, full throttle. Yeah, that is definitely faster. Let's get one more pass out of it. Oh, okay, one more clean pass. All right, let's see what we got. 22 miles an hour, that is a big jump up from stock. Let's try 3S. All right, here we go. Full throttle. That's quick. Not bad, not bad. Pretty stable. One more go. All right, let's see what we got. 32 miles an hour. That is exactly twice as fast as stock, but let's see how it bashes with that kind of power. But before we do that, we've got one more upgrade to do. Now, I'm starting to get convinced that this brushless system is not great for this particular truck. First of all, the dynamic stability control doesn't work because it's actually backwards. And unfortunately, you can't just fix that by turning the ESC around because the internal gyro would still be seeing the same directional forces. So your only real option would be to get a servo reverser. But there's another pretty big problem that stops this from being ideal, and that's the brakes on this. The brakes are really, really sensitive and they're not adjustable. So in this particular case, you're probably gonna be better off just going with an aftermarket system. If you do want to see me do some serious upgrades to this thing, let me know down in the comments and make sure you get subscribed so you don't miss that video. And then when we get back from bashing, I'm gonna give you my final thoughts on this truck. There we go, guys. The Losi Mini LMT Megalodon Edition. What do I think about this thing? I think it's a really fun little truck. I think it's built pretty well, though I really think they need to do some work on these forelinks in order to improve the handling of it. I think it looks really, really cool. This body is pretty durable. I did get some scrapes and scratches on it, but overall, for what it is, I think it'll hold up really well. These soft, rubbery parts are probably never going to break, and it's a very well-designed system. But should you buy one? Well, I don't think we even really need to talk about that. For those of you that are interested in this, you're going to buy it. The price is high, but where else are you going to get this? If you're the kind of person that just wants to buy a mini basher, that makes it a little bit more difficult of a value proposition. This is a cool mini basher and it's a unique driving experience. But if you just want pure mini bashing and you're not going for that scale Monster Jam realism, there probably are some better options out there. Again, though, that's not what this thing's about. This thing's about looking the way it does while still being a blast to drive. And if that's what you're looking for, here's your truck. And if you're looking for awesome videos to watch, here's some more of those.